Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing really well. Back today to talk about the historical fiction readathon. This is a wonderful readathon that is happening in the month of June. It is co-hosted by myself, Shelly Swearingen, Gloria Z. Thompson, Brittany over at Literally Smitten, and Melinda over at Web of Stories. In order to participate in this event, you need only read one work of historical fiction in June, but if you want to kind of spice up your reading, make it a little bit more challenging, then we have 5 prompts. Each of us co-hosts have offered a prompt for you to guide your reading by, and I am in the process of making recommendation videos for each of the 5 prompts. Previously I have done my prompt, which was to read a book about people who work within the arts, or historical fiction that is just generally about the arts, and now I'm moving on to Shelley's prompt, which is to read a work of historical fiction about a real remarkable person. This is something that is very much in my wheelhouse. You'll probably know that I host the History-a-thon every year, in which the main prompt for that is to read either fiction or non-fiction about real women of the past. So it's definitely an area of historical fiction that I enjoy. So without much further ado, let's just get straight on into these recommendations. And because I'm back at home, I actually have access to my historical fiction shelves. So that's very exciting. I can actually show you them. The first of my recommendations being The Secret Diaries of Charles Ignatius Sancho by Paterson Joseph. In this we are transported to 18th century London and reading about a black man who was living in London who escaped from slavery and the various adventures and misadventures of his life. He was a writer, he was a composer, and he was also the first black man to be able to vote. So definitely somebody worth checking out. Going over to the 19th century, my next recommendation, somebody who I talk about quite a bit on my channel, is Anne Lister. And so my recommendation for historical fiction about her life is Learned by Heart by Emma Donoghue. Mainly because this tracks the period of her life that is often not discussed, and that's her school days. I talk about Anne Lister a lot because she is a historical figure who is an icon from my hometown of Halifax. She was a rare thing in the 19th century, a woman who actually owned her own land and property, but also she is described by historians as the first modern lesbian, after her many diary entries were transcribed out of their secret code and revealed her sexual exploits with women, many exploits which were detailed quite thoroughly in her diaries. This book looks at her early life in the boarding school that she went to in York, and particularly one of her first relationships with a girl called Eliza Rain. Next up, 2 books from the same series that I would want to recommend are Cecily and The King's Mother by Annie Garthwaite. Both of these books are looking at the life of Cecily Neville, who was wife to Richard, Duke of York, and 2 of her sons would go on to be kings of England, those sons being Edward IV and Richard III. And this is a really fantastic fictionalisation of the Wars of the Roses, particularly from a woman's point of view. And it gave me insight into a figure of the Wars of the Roses who I'd never really thought much of before. And I really enjoyed reading from Cecily's point of view. Her pragmatism, her determination, occasionally her ruthlessness. The first chapter of Cecily actually opens with the burning of Joan of Arc, which in Annie Garthwaite's narrative she ends up attending. And so while I'm here, I should probably recommend Joan by Katherine Chen, which, as you can imagine, is a fictionalisation of Joan of Arc's life, crafting a narrative of her early life. But in this, she is not divinely inspired. She is just a woman with skill who has been very much abused and misused by the men in her life, taken advantage of because she is different and because of her skills. For that reason, the fact that faith and religion does not play such a large part in her fighting, I can imagine this being a bit of a controversial pick, but I thought it was a really interesting, grounded portrayal of Joan of Arc, and definitely worth checking out. Next up, you knew that I couldn't talk about real remarkable people of history without talking about Wolf Hall. I would get up the other books in this series, but they are right on the top shelf and they are quite heavy because I now have all hardbacks of these. This is one of, if not my favourite historical fiction series of all time. Hilary Mantel chronicling the life of Thomas Cromwell, lawyer to Cardinal Wolsey, who would end up becoming one of Henry VIII's right-hand men. The first book, Wolf Hall, tracks his early life, his working for Cardinal Wolsey and Wolsey's downfall, and eventually becoming more prominent within the Tudor court, and ends with the execution of Thomas More. Bring Up the Bodies chronicles 1535 to 1536. And ends with the execution of Anne Boleyn, whereas the final book, The Mirror and the Light, chronicles from the execution of Anne Boleyn right through to Thomas Cromwell's own execution in 1540. I love this series so much because it just opens up the Tudor world. It is so vivid and descriptive without ever being overdone and like Hilary Mantel is just info dumping on the page. It's there very deliberately because Thomas Cromwell himself is so meticulous in detailing things around him. The tone that she's able to create, the atmosphere, you always feel on edge in this world. It is just masterfully done. And she's able to take a character like Thomas Cromwell, who has always traditionally been portrayed as the villain, and make him, if not sympathetic, then somebody that you can at least empathise with and understand where he's coming from. Staying on with the Tudor court, I couldn't talk about real remarkable figures in history and historical fiction depictions of them without talking about Alison Weir. And I'm not quite sure that I can get them down, but if I do just pop you up here, You will see I do have some of my Alison Weir Tudor books up here alongside my Wolf Hall. Alison Weir has written pretty extensively on the Tudor court, her most popular series probably being her 6 Tudor Queens, 1 book for each of the 6 wives of Henry VIII. Previously she has written 2 fictionalisations of Elizabeth, she's written about Eleanor of Aquitaine, her first book Innocent Traitor, which is about Lady Jane Grey, and then we also have the Tudor Roses series, which goes through the lives of Elizabeth of York, Henry VIII and his daughter Mary I. And most recently she has come out with a fictionalisation of the life of Cardinal Wolsey, and I just can't get enough of them. I will pick up each of them as they come out. While I may not always agree with Alison Weir's depiction of the Tudor court, I cannot doubt that she has done a lot of research into this time period, and I love that this is its own world and she stays very consistent within it. When Alison Weir has a story that she wants to tell, she does stick with it and she will use as much historical evidence as she can, and she will also fill in gaps where they are needed. Maybe she's not as vivid and atmospheric as Wolf Hall, but it's still a delight to come back to every time. That is where I'm going to leave it for today. That is not an extensive list of all of the books that I've read about real remarkable people of history. As you may imagine, some of my other recommendations for this prompt will be featured in upcoming videos, and in fact quite a few of the books that I did for the art prompt would also count, so things like The Instrumentalist, or Costanza by Rachel Lynn Solomon, or Disobedient by Elizabeth Fremantle. All of those books feature real women of the past. Historical fiction is just a treasure trove for being able to open up the inner lives and narratives of real remarkable people, and I'm very much looking forward to what June brings for me. Do let me know if you've read any of the books I've spoken to you about today. Alternatively, please do let me know about any historical fiction about real remarkable people that you would recommend. I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.